The most powerful man in the city, the one who strikes fear into the hearts of financial cartel bosses, is panicking over dinner at his mother's house. Christian Marrow has it all: empire, money, power. But he lacks the one thing his mother wants to see: a real woman by his side. And when he hires a stranger to play his girlfriend, he doesn't realize it's the most dangerous decision of his life. Not because she's incompetent, but because she's too real. Like and comment the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has progressed. Watch until the end. You won't want to miss anything. The envelope sat on Christian Marrow's desk for 47 minutes before he touched it. He knew what it was, knew what it contained. His assistant, a thin, careful man named Garrett, who never asked questions and had survived 3 regime changes in the organization because of that precise quality, had set it down without a word at exactly 7:15 in the morning and retreated from the office before Christian had looked up from the window. Smart man. Outside, Boston in late December looked like a city trying to remember why it existed. The harbor was flat and colorless under the sky, and the lights along Atlantic Avenue still burned against the dark even at this hour, stubborn little fires that refused to acknowledge the coming of another gray morning. Christian had stood at this window more mornings than he could count. He knew every variation of this view: winter fog sitting heavy on the water, summer heat turning the air above the pavement into something liquid and dishonest, spring rain that came sideways off the ocean and hit the glass like thrown gravel. He knew this city the way a man knows the inside of a cell: every corner, every sound, every limit. He finally picked up the envelope. Inside, a single index card in his mother's handwriting. Serafina Marrow wrote everything by hand. She considered typing impersonal in email a form of cowardice. The card read, December 31st, Brooklyn, 7 o'clock. You will come. You will bring someone. I am not asking. That was it. No salutation, no signature. She didn't need one. Christian set the card on the desk and pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow. It was a technique a therapist had taught him when he was 22, and briefly, inexplicably, convinced he should get his life together. He hadn't kept up with therapy. He'd kept the breathing. 5 days. He had 5 days before New Year's Eve and his mother's dinner and the assembled chaos of 40-something Marrow relatives descending on the Brooklyn estate to eat too much and drink too much and interrogate each other with the smiling ferocity of people who believed that love and pressure were the same thing. He picked up his phone, put it back down, picked it up again. He'd had 3 conversations with his mother in the past 6 weeks. Each one had ended the same way, her voice going quiet in that specific register that meant she was not finished with the subject, only finished with the conversation, and then the click of the line going dead before he could formulate a defense. She was 71 years old, barely 5'2", and she had survived things that would have broken most people twice her size, and she did not lose arguments. Not ever. Not once in Christian's memory. You will bring someone. He stood up from the desk. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity, and he moved through his office with the particular economy of motion that people who have spent years in dangerous situations tend to develop, always aware of the geometry of a room, always tracking exits. The office itself was spare in a way that surprised people who expected something ostentatious. No trophies on the wall, no oil portraits of himself or his father, a few bookshelves, actual books with broken spines, a good desk, 2 chairs across from it for meetings. The only concession to wealth was the view and the quality of the wood and the single-framed photograph on the desk. Himself and his sister Donna at the Cape, summer, maybe 15 years ago, both of them squinting into the sun. He'd built an empire from this room, or rather, he'd managed it from here. The empire itself had been handed to him at 32 when his father died of a heart attack that the family physician had been predicting for 2 years, and Christian had stopped sleeping for about 6 months after that, and then he'd started again. And now he ran a shipping operation that covered the eastern seaboard with a cleanliness and efficiency that had impressed people who were difficult to impress. And some of that shipping operation was legitimate, and some of it was not. And he had made his peace with that distinction in the way that men in his position made their peace with things, by not examining it too closely in the quiet hours. But the quiet hours had been louder lately. His phone buzzed. He looked at it and saw his sister's name and answered. "She got to you already," Donna said. It wasn't a question. "Index card this morning. I got a phone call at 11 last night. She waited until I was definitely asleep." Christian moved to the window again. The harbor was starting to show some color now, dull pewter giving way to something slightly more alive. "How bad was it?" "She cried." He was quiet. "Not the real crying," Donna said. "The strategic crying, but still, she's getting better at deploying it on short notice." "I'm 39 years old." "Yes." She mentioned that several times, with specific reference to Marco being married with 2 kids and Tony's wife being pregnant again. It was a comprehensive presentation. His brothers. Marco, the middle one, who had married a woman from Providence and lived a life of quiet competence in a suburb of Hartford and sent birthday cards that arrived on time. Tony, the youngest, who had his father's laugh and his mother's stubbornness, and had found a woman who somehow matched both without being destroyed by either. And then Christian, the eldest, who had built the machine that funded all of it and had done so alone and had come to understand solitude as the price of that particular choice. "I can't just produce someone in 5 days, Donna." "I know." "I've been busy." "I know." "The last time I went on a date, the woman turned out to be "I know," Donna said. "You don't have to." "Interviewing me for a journalist who wanted to do an expose on the family. She had a recorder in her purse." A pause. "Okay. That one was worse than I remembered." "I haven't exactly been operating in an environment that makes relationships straightforward." Donna was quiet for a moment. He could hear her kitchen in the background, the sound of something being put in a dishwasher, the low morning noise of a house that had children in it, which her house did. A 4-year-old named Arlo who Christian found baffling and fascinating in equal measure. Then she said, "Christian, you know I'm not going to tell you to lie to Mom, but if you walked in there alone again this year, I genuinely think she might do something irreversible." "What does irreversible mean?" "She mentioned she had the number of a matchmaker in Queens." He closed his eyes. "A traditional matchmaker," Donna continued, "one who apparently sends profiles in the mail, physical profiles, with photographs." "She wouldn't. She already requested the paperwork." He stood very still for a moment with his eyes still closed, breathed. "I'll figure something out," he said, and ended the call before she could ask him what exactly that meant, because he didn't know yet, and uncertainty was not something he advertised. But the solution came to him at 2:30 in the afternoon, which was when Maya Callahan arrived to pick up Arlo. Christian had not planned to still be at Donna's house at 2:30. He'd come over at noon with the ostensible purpose of reviewing some documents that Donna, who handled a portion of the legitimate side of the family holdings, needed his signature on. But Donna had fed him lunch, which was a trap he walked into every time, because Donna was an extraordinary cook who had inherited their grandmother's instinct for food as an act of coercion. And he'd stayed through a second cup of coffee and was on his third when the front door opened and Maya Callahan came in carrying a canvas bag and a look on her face that said she'd had the kind of morning that only improved marginally as the day continued. He'd met her twice before. The first time briefly, 6 months ago when Donna had introduced her as the new nanny, and Maya had looked at him the way most people looked at a piece of furniture they weren't sure matched the room. Polite, noncommittal, already thinking about something else. The second time was at Arlo's birthday party in October, where Christian had shown up an hour late, missed the cake, and Maya had handed him a paper plate with a leftover piece on it and said, without particular warmth, "You're his uncle. You should probably know that he practiced blowing out those candles for 3 days." Then she'd walked back into the kitchen. He hadn't been able to identify why that had stayed with him. She was not what he would have described as a conventional beauty, which felt like an absurd thought to have about a woman walking into his sister's kitchen carrying a canvas bag with a broken strap. But it was the honest one. She had dark red-brown hair that she wore pulled back with the carelessness of someone who couldn't be bothered. And she was maybe 5'4", and she had the kind of face that did too many things at once, quick around the eyes, stubborn around the mouth, and currently registering exhaustion with complete transparency. She was Irish-Italian, which Donna had mentioned at some point, and which tracked because she had the particular quality of someone who had inherited two traditions of stubbornness and managed to synthesize them into something singular. She stopped when she saw him. "You're still here." "I had coffee." "It's his third," Donna said, coming in behind him from the dining room. Maya dropped the canvas bag on the counter and began unloading it. A small container of something, a child's jacket, a library book with a bright cover. "Where's Arlo?" "Napping. He'll be up in 20 minutes. Maya looked at the jacket, then looked at Donna. "He left this at the library again." "The librarian. Miss Patterson called me, yes. She has his jacket. She also said he tried to check out 17 books and threw a mild fit when I said he could only take 5. Maya's voice was matter-of-fact in a way that managed to communicate affection without sentimentality, which Christian noticed. She wasn't performing. She was just reporting. "I told him about the 5-book rule 4 times. He disagreed with the policy 4 times. Donna laughed. "He gets that from his father." "He gets it from both of you." Maya finally looked at Christian again, briefly, registering his continued presence with a flicker of mild curiosity before turning back to Donna. "I can stay until 5 if you need me to run him to the early dinner you mentioned." "You're a lifesaver." "I'm an employee." "Who is a lifesaver?" Maya's mouth did something, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one, the involuntary thing that happens when a person's body acknowledges warmth before their face has decided to. She started making coffee. Christian watched her move around the kitchen with the ease of someone who had spent enough time in a space to have internalized its geography, and something was happening in his head that he would have liked to describe as a business calculation, but which he suspected was more complicated than that, and he was already beginning to dislike how complicated it was. He waited until Donna left the room, then he said, "I have a proposition for you." Maya didn't look up from the coffee maker. "I'm employed by your sister." "It's not that kind of proposition." Every time someone says that, it's that kind of proposition. "It genuinely isn't." She turned then, looked at him with an expression that was thoroughly unimpressed and, also underneath that, carefully attentive. She was reading him. He recognized it because he did the same thing, the habitual assessment that came from years of environments where being wrong about a person could be expensive. "Go ahead," she said. He told her. He kept it clean. The dinner, the family, his mother's expectations, 5 days, 1 night, a performance that required someone who could hold their own in a room full of people trained from birth to identify weakness. He named the figure, $5,000, deposited in advance. He watched her face while he talked. She gave nothing away except in the final few seconds, when the number landed and something moved in her eyes that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. The calculation of a person who had a specific relationship with money, who knew what $5,000 was worth in actual practical terms. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Your sister would kill me," she finally said. "Not if she doesn't know the arrangement." "So you want me to lie to Donna?" "I want you to decline to share certain information." "That's what lying is. It's a distinction. It's a garbage distinction." She poured her coffee, added nothing to it, which he noticed. "Why me?" "Specifically, you could hire someone professional, an actress, someone trained." "Someone trained would be clockable in about 5 minutes by my mother. She has extraordinary instincts for performance. She raised 4 children in a household that required a great deal of careful navigation, and she has never once in my memory been successfully deceived." "And I wouldn't be clockable." "You're not performing anything when you're in a room. You're just present. That's harder to manufacture than technique." Maya looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. From somewhere upstairs, the distant sound of a small child beginning to stir from sleep. 5,000. "Yes. In advance, before I set foot in Brooklyn." "Agreed." "I'm not lying to Donna." "I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to exercise discretion. I'm going to tell her afterward." He considered this. "That's acceptable. And I want it in writing, not a formal contract, just something clear. What this is, what it isn't, what happens when it's over." She met his eyes with a directness that was slightly uncomfortable, the way honesty is often slightly uncomfortable. I want to know what the exit looks like before I walk in the door. Reasonable. I'm not doing this because I want to spend New Year's Eve in Brooklyn with your terrifying family. I know. I'm doing this because I have a specific financial situation that $5,000 addresses in a specific way, and your inconvenience is compatible with my need. I understand. Great. She turned back toward the counter. Then we understand each other. He realized, somewhere in the space between her turning away and him walking out of that kitchen, that he had been wrong about something. He'd thought the difficulty of this plan would be finding someone willing. He was beginning to suspect, in the specific way that you suspect a miscalculation you haven't fully identified yet, that the difficulty was something else entirely. He had a written agreement drafted and messengered to Donna's house the following morning. 2 pages. Plain language. No legal formalities. She'd have rejected that on principle, he suspected. Just the terms laid out. The date, the location, the compensation, the scope. 1 evening, 1 performance, complete honesty between the 2 principals, no emotional expectations created or implied. The exit. The arrangement concluded at midnight on New Year's Eve or upon mutual agreement to end it earlier. Maya sent back a signed copy with 1 handwritten addition at the bottom. No lies to his sister. If asked directly, I will be honest. He signed it. That afternoon, she appeared at his office building, not in the lobby, and she called his direct line, which he was briefly annoyed she had, before remembering that she'd gotten it from Donna at some point, and then was briefly annoyed at himself for being annoyed. She was on the street outside with a paper bag. I'm not coming up, she said. Come down. He came down. They sat on a bench near the waterfront, which he hadn't done in years. Just sat outside in the cold like a civilian, the kind of thing that his security detail, whom he had told to keep their distance for this specific encounter, would have had opinions about. She had brought sandwiches from a deli 3 blocks away that she apparently knew, and the sandwiches were good, which he mentioned, and she said, I know, I've been ordering from there since I moved to the city. You rich people always act surprised when things are good without being expensive. And something in him moved at that, the same way it had moved when she'd handed him the birthday cake plate, a small shift in something he thought was fixed. Tell me about your family, she said. She was already eating, no ceremony about it. You want the version I tell people, or the version that's true? She looked at him sideways. Which one takes longer? The true one. Start there. So he told her. He told her about his father, Vincent Marrow, who had been a man of absolute contradictions, brutal in business, tender at the dinner table, who had demanded excellence from his sons with a kind of pressure that produced results and also scar tissue. He told her about Serafina, who had loved her husband completely and also managed him the way you manage a powerful and unpredictable force, with care, with strategy, with a patience that looked like softness and was actually something harder. He told her about Marco and his peaceful Hartford life that Christian both respected and didn't entirely understand. He told her about Tony, who was the one who'd gotten out the cleanest, or as clean as anyone got when the name they carried meant what the Marrow name meant. He did not tell her everything. There were parts of the architecture of his life that were not part of this arrangement, not safe to share with anyone who wasn't already inside it. But he told her enough that it was honest, enough that it cost something to say. She listened the way she did everything, directly, without performance, asking questions when she had them, and not filling silence when she didn't. What scares you most about this dinner, she said when he'd finished? That they'll like you. She blinked. That's a strange answer. I know. Most people would say they're scared their family won't accept the person they brought. That's not my problem. He looked at the water. A ferry was crossing toward the harbor islands, moving slow and steady against the chop. My family will like you. I'm fairly certain of that. My mother will especially like you once she stops trying to determine whether you're good enough, which, with someone like you, won't take long. He paused. The problem is, what happens after they like you and after this is over? She was quiet for a moment, because then it was real to them. Yes, but not to us. He didn't answer that. Wasn't sure he could, accurately. That's your problem, she said, not unkindly, but firmly. Not mine. I'll play my part. I'll be honest when it matters. And when midnight hits, we go back to our lives. She crumpled the sandwich wrapper with a finality that seemed to settle the question. That's what the agreement says. That's what it says. She stood up, pulling her coat tighter. The wind off the harbor was specific and cold, the kind of cold that found the gap between a collar and a jaw and reminded you that winter in this city was not decorative. I'll need to know what to wear. Your family, do they dress? Yes? Formally? Donna will tell you they don't, and my mother will dress as if they do. So dress. Yes. Okay. She looked at him, and for a moment the transaction stripped away and she was just a woman looking at a man in the cold, with the harbor behind them and the city around them making its constant ambient noise. And she said, "You should know that I don't actually know how to fake it, being somewhere. I'm always actually there or I'm not. So whatever this is, I'll be doing it for real." "That's what I'm counting on," he said. She nodded once, picked up the paper bag. "I'll be at your place at 6 on the 31st. Don't be weird about the cannoli." "What cannoli?" "I stress bake," she said, already walking. "You'll get cannoli. Just accept them." He stood there for a moment after she turned the corner in the cold, with the ferry still moving across the water, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The specific unease of a situation he didn't have a full read on yet. Not danger, not the operational kind. Something else. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as danger, but had a different face. The next 3 days were logistics and small revelations. She came to the mansion. He'd given her the address, the gate code, his private number. On the 29th, ostensibly to do what she called reconnaissance, which she pronounced with cheerful practicality, as though casing someone's home before impersonating their girlfriend was a completely standard Tuesday activity. He showed her through the ground floor. She asked questions about the family photographs on the study wall, not the polished ones, the casual ones, the ones that actually showed people. And he answered them, and by the end of the hour she knew more about the Marrow family dynamics than some people who'd been adjacent to this family for years. She was a quick study. He'd known people in negotiations who couldn't absorb information this efficiently. She retained names and connected them to relationships and cross-referenced contradictions without appearing to work at it. When he mentioned that his Aunt Rosa and his Aunt Carla had not spoken directly to each other for 11 years over a dispute involving a property in Sicily that everyone was still too proud to resolve, Maya just nodded and filed it. "Don't mention Sicily to either of them," he said. "Already knew that," she said. "You told me Rosa handled the estate paperwork in 2013. If Carla was left out of that, she'd still be sore." She glanced at him. "People hold on to property disputes longer than anything. My grandfather stopped talking to his brother for 8 years over a used truck." "Did they ever reconcile?" "Eventually. At a funeral. The brothers." She looked at the photograph. His father, his uncles, his grandfather, standing in front of the restaurant in Carroll Gardens that the family had owned for 40 years. That's how it usually goes. He found himself watching her more than he meant to. Not in the way that made him uncomfortable with himself, or not only in that way, but with the particular attention of a man who has spent his adult life in a profession where reading people accurately was a survival skill, and who was encountering someone whose depth he kept underestimating. She wasn't trying to impress him. That was the thing. Most people, when they were in a room with him, were either trying to impress him or trying not to show that they were nervous, and either way the performance was detectable. Maya was neither. She was simply engaged with what was in front of her. She asked questions because she wanted answers. She said what she thought. When she found something funny, she laughed. And it was a real laugh, short and unguarded. And it had a way of recalibrating the atmosphere of a room that he hadn't experienced with anyone in a very long time. On the 30th, he picked her up from Donna's. Donna was in New Jersey for the day, visiting a friend, which made the logistics cleaner. And they walked the public garden, which he hadn't done in years, and she interrogated him about himself with a directness that he met in kind, because it turned out he'd forgotten what it felt like to be asked questions by someone who actually wanted to know the answers, not what they could do with them. "Worst thing you ever had to do for the business," she said. "That's not a first date question. This isn't a date. It's practice for one. Then practice answering difficult questions." She was watching the ducks on the frozen edge of the pond, hands in her pockets. "I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking what you carry." He was quiet for longer than usual. The park was nearly empty. It was too cold and too close to the holiday for the casual visitors. A jogger went past, breath coming in clouds. I had to fire 43 people in 1 week in 2020, he said. Legitimate business, logistics side. We'd taken a hit from the shutdowns. I knew some of those families, had met their kids at company events. He paused. I didn't lose sleep over things I won't tell you about, but I lost sleep over that. She didn't say it was understandable. She didn't say anything consoling. She just took it in. That was worth something he didn't have a word for. Your turn, he said. Worst thing I ever did? What you carry. She was quiet for a moment. The wind came off the water feature in the park, sharp and clean. I was engaged once. To a man I knew wasn't right for me. Not wrong, just not right. And I stayed for a year after I knew because I was afraid of what leaving would cost, what it would mean about me. She looked at the ducks. He's fine. Married someone else. They look happy in pictures, but I took a year from both of us because I didn't have the guts to be honest faster. How old were you? 27? That's not a character flaw. That's just being 27. Something moved in her expression, not quite gratitude, but acknowledgement. Yeah, I've mostly made my peace with it. She looked at him then directly, with those quick eyes. You're not as bad as people say. People say things about me? Donna doesn't gossip, but she has eyebrows, and her eyebrows say a lot. She started walking again. Come on, I need to know about your grandmother before tomorrow. Everything. Don't leave anything out. He fell into step beside her, and the afternoon light was doing something to the city that made it look briefly, improbably, like a place where things could go differently than they usually did. And he walked beside her and talked about his grandmother, and she listened, and neither of them mentioned what was already beginning to shift between them, because neither of them was ready to name it yet. New Year's Eve morning, he woke at 5 and could not go back to sleep. He lay in the dark of his bedroom and looked at the ceiling and ran the variables the way he always ran them before any operation. The layout of the estate in Brooklyn, the players, the likely pressure points, the vectors of potential failure. Serafina would scrutinize. Aunt Rosa would interrogate. His cousin Frankie, who was 32 and recently divorced and therefore projecting all of his own chaos outward, would be difficult to manage. His grandmother, Nonna Caterina, 91 years old, sharp as a paper cut and twice as mean when she wanted to be, would see things. She always saw things. He'd watched her dismantle 3 relationships at family dinners over the past decade, not through cruelty, but through the simple, devastating weapon of accurate observation. He didn't know if he was doing this to satisfy his mother. He didn't know if that had been true for several days. He got up at 6, made coffee, and stood at the window watching the harbor come back into light. And at 7, his phone buzzed with a text from Maya that said, "Cannoli situation confirmed. 2 dozen. If your family doesn't deserve them, that's their problem." He looked at the message for a long time before he responded. At 6 o'clock that evening, his front door opened and Maya Callahan walked in wearing a dark green dress that she'd clearly chosen with the specific intelligence of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, carrying a white bakery box tied with string, and she looked up at him with those sharp eyes and said, "You're nervous." He wasn't going to admit that. "I'm ready to go." "You're nervous," she said again, and she wasn't mocking him. She was just naming it, the same way she named everything, clearly, without drama, with the strange kindness of someone who doesn't make you feel worse for being human. "It's okay. You're allowed." He looked at her standing in his foyer with the cannoli and the green dress and the total absence of pretense, and he felt something shift in him that had not moved in years, some old fixed thing that he had stopped even noticing was fixed, and the feeling was not comfortable. "We should go," he said. "We should go," she agreed. And as the car pulled out into the Boston night and pointed south toward Brooklyn, Christian Marrow sat beside the woman he'd hired to perform a fiction and felt, with the specific dread of a man who recognizes a miscalculation too late to walk it back, that whatever they were driving toward was not going to look anything like what he'd planned. The car was a black town car, not a limousine. Christian had made that call specifically because arriving at his mother's house in a limousine was the kind of thing that invited a 40-minute conversation about ostentation that he didn't have the bandwidth for tonight. The driver, a man named Sal, who had been working for the family since Christian was in college and who communicated primarily through the angle of his rearview mirror, said nothing when they got in, just pulled out into the evening traffic and headed for the expressway. Maya sat beside Christian with the bakery box on her lap and looked out the window at the city sliding past. She wasn't performing calm. She actually was calm, which was somehow more unnerving than if she'd been visibly nervous, because nervous he could have managed. Calm meant she was thinking, and he didn't have full visibility into what she was thinking, and the lack of visibility bothered him in a way he didn't examine too carefully. "Tell me one thing I don't know yet," she said, still watching the window. "About the family? About you. Something they'll expect me to know." He considered. "I don't sleep well. Haven't in years. Your family knows when you don't sleep. It's in the face, in the way you hold yourself. My mother will have noticed the last time she saw me, and she'll be watching for whether it's better or worse." Maya turned from the window. "Is it?" "What?" "Better or worse?" He didn't answer immediately. Outside, the city gave way to the expressway, the harbor falling behind them, the lights of the airport blinking in the distance over the water. "The last 3 nights were better," he said, which was true, and which he immediately recognized as information he probably shouldn't have offered. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she turned back to the window. "Okay," she said. "I'll know that." The rest of the drive to Brooklyn, she asked him small practical things: where he'd gone to college, what he'd studied, the name of his first dog, the street in Carroll Gardens where he'd grown up. He answered all of it. She had a way of asking questions that made them feel like calibration rather than interrogation, like a person checking instruments before a flight rather than building a case. By the time Sal pulled off the expressway and into the familiar Brooklyn streets, she had assembled a working model of his life that was accurate enough to be dangerous. The estate, calling it that, always felt slightly absurd. It was simply a very large house on a good block in Carroll Gardens that his father had bought in 1981 and expanded twice since. Was already lit up when they arrived. Every window burning, cars lining the block on both sides. The sound of voices reached them through the car window before Sal had even fully stopped. A compressed wave of Italian-American family energy that Christian had been navigating since birth, and which still, every single time, hit him with the full weight of everything it represented. "There are a lot of cars," Maya said. "Yes." "You said 40-something relatives. That was a conservative estimate." She looked at the house. Something moved through her expression quickly. Not fear, exactly. More like the specific recalibration of a person who has just learned the scale of something is larger than expected and is rapidly updating their approach. Then it was gone. She straightened slightly. "All right," she said to herself more than to him. He got out first and came around. She was already opening her own door before he reached it, which he might have known, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk with the bakery box under one arm and looked at the house with those level eyes and said, "Walk in like you're happy to be here." "I'm never happy to be here." "Tonight you are." She looked at him. "Chin up. Hand at my back. Don't clench your jaw. You clench it when you're bracing." He stared at her. "How do you know that?" "You did it 3 times in the car." She was already moving toward the front steps. "Come on." Ichet. The door opened before they reached it. Serafina Marrow was not a large woman, but she filled door frames. She was 71, and she wore it like an accomplishment, with her silver hair set and her dark eyes doing the rapid, comprehensive assessment of the situation that they always did, moving from Christian's face to Maya's face to the bakery box to their relative positioning in about 2 seconds flat. Then she smiled. It was a real smile, Christian noted, not the performance smile she deployed for people she was uncertain about, but the genuine one, which startled him, because he hadn't expected it this fast. "Christian." She took his face in both hands and kissed him once on each cheek in the old way. Then she turned to Maya. "And you?" "Mrs. Marrow." Maya extended her hand, which Serafina looked at, then ignored and pulled her into a brief and comprehensive embrace instead. Maya absorbed this without flinching. "I brought cannoli. I hope that's all right. I stress bake, and this week was—" "Cannoli is never not all right." Serafina took the box. looked at Maya with the full weight of those dark eyes. Come in. Everyone is terrible and loud, and they'll love you. Maya glanced at Christian. Just a flick of those eyes, quick and communicative. He caught it. It meant, she's more than you prepared me for. He knew. No. The interior of the house was controlled chaos in the specific key of his family, the volume of a dozen simultaneous conversations, the smell of tomato sauce that had been going since probably this morning, somebody's kids running through the front hall and being yelled at in two languages by whoever was closest. Christian moved through it with the muscle memory of 40 years of this, nodding to uncles, accepting embraces from aunts, absorbing the rapid-fire questions. How are you? You look thin. How's the business? Did you hear about Marco's car? With the practiced economy of a man who had learned to process all of this on a secondary channel while keeping his primary attention elsewhere. His primary attention was on Maya. She was something to watch. He would give her that entirely, and without qualification. She was something to watch in a room full of Marrows. She didn't retreat, and she didn't perform. She engaged. When his Aunt Rosa, who was 67 and suspicious of everything on principle, intercepted her within the first 4 minutes with the particular smile that meant she was about to ask questions designed to reveal inconsistency, Maya didn't tighten. She leaned in, slightly, and said, "You have to be Rosa. Christian told me you were the one who actually kept this family together during the 70s. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Rosa blinked, just barely. "He said that?" "He said you were the most pragmatic one in the room, and that the pragmatic people never get enough credit." Maya's voice was warm and specific, not flattery, calibrated truth, served at the right temperature. "Is that accurate?" Rosa looked at her for a long moment. "It's accurate," she said, with a grudging satisfaction that meant she was already at least partially won. "Come, I'll show you where to put your coat." Christian watched his famously difficult aunt lead Maya toward the coat room and felt something cold move through him that he identified after a moment as something close to awe. Donna appeared at his elbow. "She's not a date," Donna said. It was not a question. He kept his eyes forward. "What?" "She's something, but she's not a date in the normal sense. Maya doesn't—" Donna stopped, recalibrated. "How much did you pay her?" He looked at his sister. Donna had their father's eyes, dark and direct, and she was looking at him now with an expression that was not angry, but was absolutely not going to accept a deflection. "Donna, I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to stand here and be completely pleasant and ask you one more time. Did you hire my nanny to come to this dinner?" He held her gaze. "I'll explain everything after." "Oh, you absolutely will." She picked up a glass of wine from a passing tray. "She has no idea what she walked into, Christian. She has a very clear idea." "Does she know about the business? All of it?" "She knows what she needs to know." Donna looked across the room to where Maya was now apparently deep in a conversation with both Rosa and Rosa's daughter-in-law, all three of them leaning together over the cannoli box that Serafina had opened, and the body language was already comfortable in a way that Donna appeared to find simultaneously impressive and alarming. "She's going to be hurt," Donna said quietly. "It's one night." "Christian." His sister's voice was the specific low register she used when she was not joking at all. "Look at her. Then look at yourself right now and try to tell me this is just one night." He didn't answer. Donna walked away. Go. Dinner was at 8, which meant the period between now and 8 was the section of the evening he had privately categorized as the gauntlet, open-floor family interaction with no structured activity to absorb the ambient interrogation energy. He moved through it, accepting drinks, fielding questions about the business with his standard deflections, keeping half his awareness on Maya's location in the room the way he kept awareness of exits. She surfaced beside him at 7:15, appearing at his left with a glass of red wine and a look that said she had been thoroughly worked over and was still standing. "Your cousin Frankie tried to find out what I do for a living for about 10 minutes without asking me directly," she said, under the ambient noise of the room. "I told him I worked in early childhood development." "That's true. That's why I said it." She sipped the wine. "He's going through a divorce." "I know." He's looking for someone to be as miserable as he is. I told him that what he's feeling is temporary, and he looked like I'd handed him something he needed. She paused. He's not a bad person. He's just in pain, and he doesn't have the vocabulary for it yet. Christian looked at her. How do you do that? Do what? Look at someone for 20 minutes and know what they need. She considered this, and for a moment she looked less like a woman deployed in a tactical situation and more like someone genuinely thinking through a question. I worked with kids for 8 years. Kids can't tell you what's wrong. They can only show you. You learn to look at what someone's doing rather than what they're saying. She looked across the room to where Frankie was standing near the window, alone with his drink, examining the middle distance. He's doing what kids do when they're hurt. He's going loud in groups and quiet when he thinks nobody's watching. Something ached in Christian's chest, brief and specific. He didn't identify it. Your grandmother is at the end of the hall, Maya said. I haven't been introduced yet. I know. You've been putting it off. You've been managing the room and looping back past her twice without stopping. She looked at him directly. She's 91. She's not going to disappear if you don't face her in the next 5 minutes. But you're going to spend those 5 minutes being more nervous than if you'd just done it already. He looked at her. When did you start reading me? I was reading you in your sister's kitchen the first day. She said it plainly, without weight. Come on. Nonna Katerina was seated in the corner armchair she had occupied at every family event in this house for as long as Christian could remember, and she looked at them approaching with the particular expression of a woman who has spent 9 decades watching human beings make the same mistakes in slightly different costumes, and no longer finds it either surprising or especially amusing. She was small and white-haired and dressed in black as she always was, and her eyes were sharp in a way that age had refined rather than dimmed, and she let them come to her rather than any gesture of meeting them, which was her right, and she knew it. Nonna. Christian bent and kissed her cheek. Her hand came up and gripped his wrist briefly, firm, certain, a reflex that said, I see you more clearly than language. Then she looked at Maya. Maya sat down on the ottoman across from her without being invited to, which Christian registered as either a mistake or a masterpiece, and said, Signora, I've heard a great deal about you. Nonna looked at her for a long, unblinking moment. Then, in the accented English she used when she chose to, What did they tell you? That you came to this country with $20 and a recipe for ragu, that your mother told you never to share with anyone outside the family, and that you've kept that promise for 60 years. Nonna was very still. Who told you that? Christian. The old woman looked at her grandson, then back at Maya. Something moved behind those sharp eyes. Not warmth exactly, more like the first acknowledgement of a worthy interlocutor. You want the recipe, she said. Absolutely not, Maya said. Some things should stay private. She paused. But if you ever wanted to tell me about coming over, about those first years, I'd want to hear it. If you wanted to tell it. There was a silence. Christian held himself very still. Nonna said, You're not what he usually brings. He doesn't usually bring anyone. No. The old woman's eyes were moving over Maya with the slow, thorough appraisal of someone who is reading between every line. He doesn't. She looked at Christian. Sayadidi, she said. Sit down. He sat. Tit. By 9:30, dinner had been cleared and the room had reorganized itself into the post-meal configuration. Some people at the big table still with wine, others in the adjacent sitting room, the children who were still awake planted in front of something in the back of the house. The volume had, if anything, increased. Someone had started a debate about a football game that had apparently been incorrectly decided in 2019 and showed no signs of resolving. Serafina was in the kitchen with 2 of her sisters, and the sound of their combined laughter came through the door at intervals like something geological. Christian found himself standing in the hallway outside the kitchen with a glass of whiskey he'd barely touched, and the specific feeling of a man who has managed a complex operation all evening and is now permitted in a quiet corridor to be briefly, privately exhausted. Tony materialized beside him. His youngest brother was 34. broader through the shoulders than Christian, with a warmth in his face that had always seemed to Christian like something he'd been given that Christian had not, some additional allotment of ease. "She's good," Tony said, without preamble. "She's helping me out." "I know she is." Tony sipped his drink. "You always did pick the most complicated version of everything." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you could have hired anyone. You picked someone who's going to make you feel something, and now you're standing in the hallway looking like a man who just realized the drop is longer than he calculated." Tony looked at him with the infuriating steadiness of a younger sibling who has watched you long enough to know your patterns. "Where is she now?" "Sitting room. Rosa has her." "Rosa likes her. I could tell at dinner." "Yes. Mom likes her." "I know. Nonna." Tony spoke to her in Italian for approximately 4 minutes at dinner. Nonna hasn't spoken Italian voluntarily to anyone outside the family in 11 years. Tony paused. "Just observing?" "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say you know what you're doing." Tony looked at him steadily. "Do you know what you're doing?" The whiskey in Christian's glass caught the hallway light. He looked at it. "No," he said. First honest answer he'd given anyone on that question in a while. Tony nodded slowly. "Okay, then at least you know that." But he found her in the sitting room at 10:15, in the corner of the sofa, and she wasn't performing for anyone. The room had thinned. Some people had migrated to the kitchen for the late round of espresso and dessert. Others had gone quiet with wine. Maya was sitting with Frankie's mother, an aunt by marriage named Louisa, who was gentle and often overlooked in the family's louder dynamics, and the two of them were talking in low voices about something that made Louisa's face do a thing that Christian hadn't seen it do in a long time. He stood in the doorway and watched, and what he felt was not manageable. Maya looked up and found him, read something in his face, and held his gaze for a moment before returning her attention to Louisa, finishing the conversation with the care of someone who understood that some exchanges needed a proper ending rather than an interruption. When Louisa moved toward the kitchen, Maya came to him. "You okay?" she said. "Fine." "You're not fine." "I'm fine." She looked at him for a moment with those direct eyes. "Something happened." "Nothing happened. It's a family dinner." "Christian." The use of his name, just that. Direct and unornamented. "You can just tell me." Something cracked in the structure of him, briefly. He was so tired of being managed, of managing, of calculating, of maintaining the specific tension that his life required at all times. He was so simply, exhaustedly tired. "I need some air," he said. She followed him without being asked. No. The back garden was small and cold and strung with lights that Serafina put up every year, and it smelled of winter and old stone and the faint threat of someone's cigarette from the neighboring yard. Christian stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the lights and breathed, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Then Maya said, quietly, "Tell me what's actually wrong." "Donna knows," he said, "that this is an arrangement." Maya absorbed this. "How?" "She's known me for 39 years. "Is she angry?" "She's not making a scene, which means she's furious." He exhaled. His breath came out in a white cloud in the cold. "She thinks I'm going to hurt you." A beat of silence. "What do you think?" He looked at the lights, looked at the cold dark above them. "I think," he said carefully, "that the variable I didn't account for is that I'm more capable of being hurt than I remembered." She was very still beside him. "That's not a declaration," he said. It's not that. I just need you to know that this stopped being a clean transaction for me sometime in the last 3 days, and I don't know what to do with that, and I thought you should know rather than let it become a thing that I was managing around you." The silence stretched. In the house behind them, someone laughed, loud and sudden, and then the noise swelled again briefly before dropping back. "I told you in your kitchen," Maya said, "that I don't know how to fake being somewhere." "I know." "I told you I'd be doing it for real." "I know." "So don't act like this is something that happened to only you." She turned and faced him. In the string lights, her face was unguarded in a way that was different from earlier in the night. The competence still there, but the armor thinner, and under it something that he recognized because he was feeling the same thing. The specific exposure of a person who has accidentally told the truth. This is inconvenient for me too. I have a job, and my job is working for your sister, and your sister is currently in there furious at you on my behalf for something I agreed to, and in 11 or so weeks I'm going to have to show up to that kitchen and be a normal employee. I know. So I don't want to hear about your miscalculations, she said, and her voice was steady, but there was an edge in it that was not anger exactly, but something that lived near it, something protective. I made the same ones, okay? We both did. That's the situation. He looked at her, in the cold, in the lights. Okay, he said. Okay. Neither of them moved. In the house, audible through the back wall, the countdown had begun. Someone had turned on a television, and the noise of Times Square came through distantly. The crowd, the announcer, the building energy of 49 seconds before midnight. Maya looked at the wall of the house, then at him. We should go back in. Yes. Before the countdown. Yes. Neither of them moved. 40 seconds on the other side of the wall. 38. The crowd noise swelled, voices inside the house rising to meet it, the Marrow family gathering itself for the moment, the specific collective holding of breath before the year turned. Christian, Maya said. Her voice had changed, just slightly. The steady practicality had shifted into something else, something that lived under the practical, that the practical had been sitting on top of all night. I know, he said. I'm saying, I know what you're saying. 15 seconds. 10. The back door opened and his mother's voice came through. Cristiano! Inside now, it's almost... And Serafina Marrow stopped. She stood in the doorway with the kitchen light behind her and looked at her son and Maya Callahan standing in the cold garden, not touching, not kissing, not doing anything except looking at each other with the particular helpless directness of two people who have just understood something that cannot be understood. And she was absolutely silent. 5, 4, 3. The crowd inside erupted. Someone popped a bottle. Arlo, on speakerphone from Donna's, wherever the phone was being held, Donna's voice or someone's voice, calling Happy New Year in his 4-year-old's volume. Christian looked at his mother in the doorway. Serafina looked at him, then at Maya. Her expression was not readable in the normal sense, but her eyes were doing the thing they did when she knew something that she was choosing not to say yet, and what they were saying, without words, in the 10 seconds that the world reorganized itself around midnight, was, I already know what this is. And then she turned and went back inside. And in the garden, in the cold and the string lights, with the new year collapsing in on all sides of them, Maya Callahan reached up and put her hand flat against Christian Marrow's chest, right over the sternum. Not a kiss, not an embrace, just that, her hand and the warmth of it through his shirt, feeling his heart doing what a heart does when it has stopped performing and started. Her hand stayed there for 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough that Christian felt his own heartbeat under her palm like something he couldn't control, which was the problem, which had been the problem for days. And then she took it away and stepped back, and the cold rushed in to fill the space between them, and both of them stood in the garden looking at anything except each other. We should go inside, she said. Yes. They went inside. The next hour was the most technically demanding performance of Christian Marrow's adult life, and he had performed in front of federal investigators, cartel representatives, and a congressional subcommittee that had spent 3 days trying to find something they could use against the family's shipping operation. None of that had required what this required: standing in a room full of people who loved him and managing the specific, suffocating weight of something real while appearing to manage nothing at all. Maya was better at it than he was. He watched her re-enter the living room and absorb the midnight chaos, the embraces, the spilled champagne, his cousin's kids careening through the adult legs, his Uncle Sal, who always cried at New Year's and was crying now with complete abandon, and she moved through all of it with a warmth that was not performance, that he knew by now was not performance, which made watching it harder rather than easier. Serafina found him at 12:40. She came to stand beside him at the edge of the room with a glass of something she wasn't drinking and looked at the room the way she always looked at rooms, comprehensively, missing nothing. For a while she said nothing. His mother was expert at silence. She understood it as a tool. She made the cannoli herself, Serafina said. I know. I could tell. The shells are hand-rolled. You can't buy that. The filling is fresh ricotta, not the processed. She paused. She was nervous about coming here. She was fine. She was fine here. His mother looked at him now, just turned and looked at him with those dark eyes that had been reading him since he was 3 years old. She was nervous before. She stress-baked 2 dozen cannoli at, she checked the math in her head, probably 3 or 4 in the morning, because she was worried about walking into this house. He said nothing. A woman who is pretending doesn't bake cannoli at 4 in the morning because she's nervous about impressing strangers. Serafina's voice was even, not accusatory, just exact. A woman who is pretending shows up with flowers from a shop and a rehearsed smile. Mom, I'm not angry. She turned back to the room. I want you to understand that. I'm telling you what I see, not building a case. She sipped the drink finally. What I see is a woman who cared about this before she walked through the door, and a son who looks like a man standing at the edge of something he doesn't know how to cross. She was quiet for a moment. Your father used to stand like that, before he asked me to marry him, like the floor might give way. This isn't, I'm not saying what it is or isn't. She touched his arm briefly, the specific touch that meant she was being precise rather than comforting. I'm saying be careful with her, whatever this is. Be honest with her about what you are, all of it, before she decides anything. That's all. She moved away before he could respond, drifting back into the room with the ease of a woman in complete command of her environment, and he stood at the wall and breathed and tried to locate the version of himself that knew how to handle situations cleanly. He couldn't find it. They left at 1:30. Sal brought the car around and they rode back toward Boston through the empty early morning expressway, and Maya sat with her shoes off and her feet tucked under her on the seat and her head tilted back against the headrest and her eyes closed, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Then she said without opening her eyes, Your mother knows. Yes. How much does she know? Enough. Maya was quiet for a moment. Is she angry? No. Another silence. Outside, the highway was nearly empty. Just the occasional truck, the amber wash of the overhead lights, the flat dark of the Massachusetts landscape beyond the guardrails. Donna was watching me all night, Maya said. Not hostile, just watching, like she was trying to figure out whether to be worried about me. She is worried about you. I don't need her to be. I know you don't. He looked at the window. That doesn't stop her. Maya opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling of the car. I've been thinking about what you said in the garden. Maya, not to revisit it. I just want to say something once, and then we don't have to keep returning to it. She turned her head to look at him. Her face in the dark of the car was tired and honest and close, and he kept his eyes straight ahead with the specific effort of a man who has decided that looking directly at something is currently not safe. I knew what I was doing when I signed the agreement. I'm not a person who does things without understanding what she's signing up for. So whatever happens next, whatever this is or isn't, I don't want you managing it. I don't want you deciding on my behalf what I can handle. He looked at her then, couldn't help it. I'm not managing you. You've been managing me since the garden. You've been making calculations about what to say and what not to say, and how much space to create between us so that the situation stays at a temperature you can control. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was the flattest, most precise version of honesty, the kind that costs something to deliver and something to receive. I'm telling you I see it, and I'm telling you to stop. The car hummed along the highway. Sal's eyes were fixed forward. He could hear his own breathing. All right, he said. All right, she repeated. She looked back at the ceiling. The dinner was good. Your family is... She paused. More than I expected. In a way I wasn't prepared for. A beat. Frankie's going to be okay, by the way. He just needs someone to tell him the pain is temporary. He heard it tonight. He'll hold on to it. He watched the highway. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight. You paid me. Not for the cannoli, not for Louisa, not for my grandmother." He paused. "She hasn't spoken Italian voluntarily since 2013. Maya's mouth moved, the shadow of that involuntary almost smile. "She told me the ragu story." "She told you, not the recipe, just the story around it, her mother, the boat over, what it felt like to carry something that precious across that much water and not know if anyone on the other side would even understand what you were carrying." Maya's voice had gone quiet. "It was one of the best things anyone's ever told me." The car took the exit toward the city, and the lights of Boston appeared ahead of them. And Christian Marrow sat in the back of that town car and felt something in his chest that had no operational category, that he could not file or manage or defer. And he let it sit there because Maya had told him to stop managing, and he was, for perhaps the first time in years, trying to do as he was told. He didn't see her for 2 days. He told himself this was appropriate. The agreement had ended at midnight on December 31st, and it was now January 2nd, and there was no framework remaining that justified contact, and he had a business to run, and she had a life to return to, and Donna was still not speaking to him with her full voice, which meant the situation was in a state that required time rather than action. He lasted until January 3rd, when he called her at 8 in the evening. She picked up on the third ring. "Hi," she said. Just that. No surprise in it, no warmth performed, no armor either, just the plain sound of a person answering a call they'd perhaps expected. "I was going to apologize," he said. "For what specifically?" "For involving you in something that turned out to be more complicated than the term suggested." A pause. "That's a very careful apology. I'm working on the less careful version." "How's that going?" "Slowly." He was in his study, standing at the window again, the harbor dark below. "I wanted to say, without a business arrangement framing it, without it being strategic, that the last week was the least alone I've felt in a long time. And that has nothing to do with what you agreed to do. It has to do with who you are." The silence on her end was not empty. He'd learned her silences well enough now to know the difference between empty and full. "I'm off Thursday," she said. "Okay. If you wanted to have coffee." "Not as anything, just coffee." "Just coffee," he said. "Yes." He looked at the harbor. "I know a place near the waterfront that's—" "I know where," she said. 8 o'clock. She paused. "Christian?" "Yeah." "It's good that you called." She hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after that. Thursday came and went, and the coffee was not just coffee, because it turned out there was no version of sitting across a table from Maya Callahan for 2 hours that qualified as a neutral event. And when he walked her back to her car afterward, and they stood on the street in the January cold, he kissed her, finally. Not the midnight performance in Brooklyn, but the real version, unwitnessed and unambiguous, and she kissed him back with the same total commitment she brought to everything, and then she pulled back and looked at him with those eyes and said, "This is going to be complicated." "Yes." "Your world is—" "I know what my world is." "Do you know what it would ask of someone who got close to you?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said, and meant it as a warning. She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to change it. I'm asking if you're honest about it." She paused. "Can you be honest about it?" "I'm trying." She nodded once, got in her car, drove away. He stood on the street and watched the taillights disappear, and understood that what had just happened was not the beginning of something clean. It was the beginning of something real, which was harder and worse and more necessary than clean. And he drove back to his office and sat at his desk and tried to work, and mostly looked at the harbor. Oh, the complications arrived the following Monday. He should have seen it earlier. In retrospect, the shape of it had been visible for weeks if he'd been looking at the right things, rather than the things directly in front of him. But he'd been distracted. Not dangerously distracted, not in a way that would have shown to anyone watching, but distracted in the specific interior way of a man whose attention has been split by something he didn't budget for. And in his business, interior distraction had exterior consequences. His operations director, A careful, hard-faced man named Brennan, who had been with the organization for 11 years and who communicated primarily in facts delivered without inflection, called him at 7 Monday morning with a voice that was 2 registers lower than his normal, already low voice. "We need to meet," Brennan said. "Today, not by phone." Christian met him at the warehouse facility in Quincy at 9, and Brennan laid it out on the metal table in the back office with the particular efficiency of a man who has prepared the presentation because the alternative is saying it in real time, and real time would be worse. The problem had a name: Danny Reyes. Danny Reyes was 31, connected to a distribution network in New York that the Marrow operation had done business with, carefully and at careful distance, for the past 4 years. The relationship had always been transactional and bounded. There were things the Marrow organization did and things it didn't, lines that Christian had held with more discipline than his father ever had, because he understood that the lines were the things standing between the legitimate side of the empire and the thing that ate legitimate empires. What Brennan had found over the preceding week was that Danny Reyes had been running a secondary operation through 2 of the Marrow shipping routes without authorization. Not for long. 8 months, maybe 10. Small enough to hide in the volume. The product moved through was not something Christian's operation had ever handled and would not have been permitted if asked. Reyes had not asked. "How did he get access?" Christian said. His voice was very even. "Paulie Greco," Brennan said. Christian looked at the table. Paulie Greco was 38, had been with the organization for 7 years, had been at Christian's father's funeral. "Paulie," he said. He was compensated. Brennan slid a number across the table on a piece of paper. It was a significant number. He routed the secondary manifests through the Portland spoke, kept them off the primary documentation. "How long have you known?" "I confirmed it 48 hours ago. I had suspicion for 10 days. Christian absorbed this. "Where is Reyes now?" "New York. He doesn't know we know." "And Paulie?" "At home. Also doesn't know." Christian stood up from the table. He walked to the window of the back office, which looked out over the warehouse floor, the organized movement of the operation, the machinery of something he had built and managed and kept clean, or believed he had kept clean, or had kept clean until someone he trusted decided the compensation was sufficient reason to compromise it. He looked at the operation and felt something he had felt very few times in his adult life, the vertiginous drop of a man who has found that the floor he was standing on was not what he thought it was. "What does Reyes have?" he said. "That's the part," Brennan said, and his voice was the lowest yet, "that you need to sit down for." Christian turned from the window. He looked at Brennan's face, at the particular closed-down quality of a man who is delivering news that he has been dreading delivering, and he sat down. Reyes had documentation, not just the shipping records. Those were damaging but survivable, the kind of thing a good attorney could contextualize as an employee acting without authorization, which was true. What Reyes had, according to the information Brennan had extracted from a source inside the New York network, were communications. Private communications from a Marrow associate, intercepted and retained, that discussed the broader structure of the operation in terms that were not ambiguous, that named names including Christian's own, that if surfaced publicly or delivered to federal investigators would constitute the most comprehensive exposure of the Marrow organization's less than legitimate architecture since 1987. "Where did he get communications?" Christian said. Brennan hesitated. One beat, which from Brennan was equivalent to a long pause from anyone else. "We think he had access inside your household." Christian was very still. "Say that again." "We think the initial interception happened through a device in your home, a phone or a connected device. Someone either physically accessed the network or—" Brennan stopped. "We don't know who yet." "When?" "The communications referenced are from October to December, last year." October to December, the past 3 months. The period covering his father's anniversary, 2 board meetings, and his mind moved through it with the cold efficiency he relied on in situations like this. The part of him that didn't feel, that only calculated. Every significant conversation he'd had in that house about the operation's structure. Every conversation. Including, 3 nights ago, a call he'd had on his personal phone in his study, The window open, the study on the ground floor where he'd discussed the Portland routing with Brennan in terms that would be taken without context, catastrophic. He stood up again. He needed to move. Needed the room to be larger than it was. "The source inside New York," he said. "How reliable?" "Reliable enough that I'm sitting here." "What does Reyes want?" "We don't know that he wants anything yet. We don't know if he's holding it for insurance, if he's been approached by investigators, if he's planning to use it offensively." Brennan looked at him steadily. "What we know is he has it, and he knows what it's worth, and he's had it for approximately 6 weeks without moving on it." 6 weeks. Christian did the math. He's waiting for something. That's my read. Or someone told him to wait. Brennan said nothing, which was its own answer. Christian pressed his palms flat on the metal table and breathed. In, out. The technique from the therapist he'd seen at 22. He thought of Maya and the coffee and the kiss in the cold, and then he put the thought somewhere else, somewhere sealed, because he couldn't have it here, couldn't let it be in the same room as this. "Paulie," he said. "Yes. I need to talk to him today." "Understood." "Not—" He stopped. He was aware that what he said next would define something. He was aware of the version of himself that his father would have deployed in this situation, the version that handled betrayal with a finality that left nothing to revisit. And he was aware that he had spent his adult life maintaining distance from that version, and that the distance was being tested right now. "I need information from him first. Everything he gave Reyes, everything he knows about what Reyes has. I need that before anything else." Brennan nodded. "And I need the identity of whoever accessed my household network. That is the first priority." "Already working it." Christian picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at the warehouse floor through the window one more time, at the operation moving cleanly, as it was supposed to move, as it had moved for 7 years under his hand, and felt the specific cold of a man who understands that a storm he didn't see coming has been building for months and is now very close. "One more thing," Brennan said. Christian looked at him. "The source in New York. He mentioned that Reyes has been asking questions." Brennan's eyes were careful, neutral, reporting. "About you specifically, your personal life, who you spend time with, new people in your circle." A pause. "He was specifically curious about New Year's Eve, who you brought to Brooklyn, where she lives, where she works." The room was very quiet. "He mentioned the nanny," Brennan said. Christian did not move, did not react visibly. He stood with his jacket in his hand and the warehouse noise outside the door and Brennan's face across the table. And the thing that happened inside him in that moment was not fear in any ordinary sense. It was colder than fear, more precise. The specific zero temperature of a man who has understood, fully and finally, that his interior distraction has created an exterior consequence, and that the consequence is not abstract, and that the person standing in the path of it has no idea she is standing there. He put on his jacket. "Find Paulie," he said. "I'll be there in an hour." He walked out of the warehouse into the January cold and got into his car and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, and the thing he had been allowing himself to feel for the past week, the warmth of it, the terrifying ordinary warmth of Thursday coffee and a kiss on a cold street, collapsed inward like a building taking a structural hit, and what replaced it was the version of Christian Marrow he had spent years trying to keep in a specific confined space, the version that his mother feared and his brothers understood, and his father had trained into him before he was old enough to understand what was being built. He picked up his phone. He could call her now. He could tell her to go somewhere, to take Arlo somewhere, to stay away from the house, to not ask why. He could keep her safe at the cost of explaining nothing, which was what the operational version of himself recommended, because explaining was exposure, and exposure was risk. His thumb hovered over her name. He put the phone down. He drove toward Southie, toward Paulie Greco's row house, toward the conversation that was going to be the worst conversation of the year so far. And it was only the 6th of January. And somewhere in the back of his mind, underneath the operational cold, underneath the calculation, one thought circled and would not stop circling. She asked him on the street outside the coffee shop if he was honest about what his world asked of people who got close to him. He had said yes. He had been wrong. He hadn't known, when he said it, that the asking had already begun, that the machinery of his world had already noticed her, had already logged her, had already filed her into the category of variable that could be used, and that the man who was supposed to protect people in his circle had been so busy discovering what it felt like to be known by another person that he had left the door open long enough for something to walk through it, that he would now have to find a way to walk back before it reached her. And the distance between the warehouse in Quincy and Maya Callahan's apartment near Donna's house was exactly the distance between the life he had and the one he could. Polly Greco's row house on Dorchester Avenue had a blue door that his wife had painted 2 summers ago, and a small wreath on the knocker left over from Christmas, and a motion sensor light above the steps that clicked on when Christian came up the walk at 10:14 in the morning. And all of it, the blue door, the wreath, the light, had the quality of a life that had been built carefully over a long time by a person who understood what stability was worth. And Christian stood on those steps for exactly 3 seconds before he knocked, because he needed those 3 seconds to be certain of the version of himself that was going to walk through that door. Not his father's version. His own. Polly answered in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of coffee in his hand. And when he saw Christian, his face did a complex thing, a rapid sequence of reactions, each one lasting less than half a second, that Christian tracked the way he tracked everything. Recognition, then something adjacent to relief, then the specific collapse of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has caught up. The coffee cup tilted in Polly's hand, just slightly. He corrected it. "Christian?" he said. "Polly." Christian looked at him. "Your wife home?" "She's at her sister's." His voice was careful, dry. "Kids are at school." "Good." Christian stepped past him into the house without being invited, because that was no longer a consideration, and Polly closed the door and they stood in the front hall among the coats and the boots and the framed school photographs on the wall, and Christian said, "Tell me about Danny Reyes." Polly's jaw moved. Something in his face shut down, slowly, like a window being closed. "I don't know what—" "Polly." Just the name. Flat and final, and with enough weight behind it that Polly stopped. The silence in the hall lasted 4 seconds. Then Polly said, "How much do you know?" "Enough to be here without Brennan." Christian looked at him steadily. "Which means I'm giving you the version of this where you talk to me, not the other version." Polly set the coffee cup down on the hall table with a care that suggested his hand wasn't entirely steady. He took his glasses off his forehead and folded them and put them in his breast pocket and looked at the floor. He was 48 years old, and he had the compact, worn quality of a man who had spent his adult life doing difficult things without complaint and had aged accordingly. Christian had known him since he was 26, had trusted him with things that required trust in its most absolute form. "He came to me in March," Polly said he had a business proposition, said it would run clean, stay small. 8 months, he said, just until he moved his operation to a different network. And you agreed. He had—" Polly stopped, started again. "He had something on me, Christian, not the business, personal. Something from before I was with the organization." He looked up. His eyes were tired in a specific way, not the tiredness of one bad night, but of months of carrying weight he hadn't shared with anyone. "My kid, my youngest. There was an incident in 2019 that I handled outside of channels. Reyes had documentation, said if I didn't cooperate, he'd put it where it would do maximum damage." Christian looked at him for a long time. "You should have come to me." "I know. In March, when he approached you, you should have come to me and we would have handled it." "I know." Polly's voice cracked on the second word, barely, a hairline fracture. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see—" He stopped. "What does he have?" Christian said. His voice was even. He needed the answer more than he needed to make Polly feel the weight of it right now. That accounting would come, but not yet, not before he had what he needed. Everything, all of it. What did you give him access to? What did he take? What does he have right now? Polly told him. It took 15 minutes, and it was methodical and specific in the way that confessions from precise men tend to be. And Christian listened to all of it without interrupting, standing in the hallway of the house, with the framed school photographs on the wall. Polly's 3 kids at various ages, growing up in sequence. The youngest a girl with a gap-toothed smile in the most recent one, and cataloged every piece of information against what Brennan had told him and built the complete picture. It was worse than Brennan had conveyed. Not by much, but the margin mattered. The communications Reyes had were not just structural. They included 2 conversations that touched on a federal investigation that had been circling the Marrow organization's logistics network since 2021. Conversations in which Christian had spoken frankly about the investigation's scope and what the organization knew about its direction. If those conversations reached the investigators, they would not constitute evidence of a crime by themselves, but they would tell the investigators exactly how much the Marrow organization knew about their methods. And that knowledge, surrendered, would close every avenue that had kept the investigation at a manageable distance for 3 years. When Polly finished, the hall was very quiet. "He hasn't moved on it yet," Polly said. "Far as I know, he's been sitting on it." "He's been asking questions about me," Christian said. "Personal, recent. He flagged Maya Callahan by name." Polly went still. "The nanny?" "Yes." "Christian, how did he know about her?" Polly's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the floor and back up, and in the 4 seconds of that sequence, Christian read everything he needed to read. "I mentioned her," Polly said. It came out low. "Not as anything. He was asking who was in your circle, who you were seeing, the usual background he always wanted. I told him she was new, that you'd brought her to the New Year's dinner." Polly's face had gone to something that looked like a man watching a building he'd lived in for years beginning to burn. "I didn't think he'd... No." Christian's voice was quiet, that specific quiet. "You didn't think." He left Polly in the hallway and walked back out through the blue door into the January morning and stood on the sidewalk and breathed for a count of 10, and then he called Brennan. "I need eyes on Maya Callahan today," he said. "Discreet. Nothing that touches her, just coverage. I need to know her movements, and I need to know if anyone else is watching her." "Already dispatched," Brennan said. "I anticipated." "And Reyes?" "Working on his location. I need a direct line to him by tonight, no intermediaries." A pause. "You're going to meet him?" "Yes." "Christian, that's... tonight. Arrange it." He ended the call. He called Maya at noon. She picked up on the second ring this time. "Hi." The same plain sound, unguarded. "Are you at Donna's?" A brief pause. "Yeah, why?" "I need you to stay inside today. Don't take Arlo out. If Donna asks, tell her there's a weather thing, something minor. Just stay in." The pause this time was longer. "What happened?" "Nothing's happened. I just need..." "Christian." Her voice had changed. Not afraid. Maya did not do fear the conventional way, he had learned, but alert, calibrated. "You called me to tell me to stay inside. Something happened." He was in his car outside Polly's house, and the street was empty, and the blue door was closed, and above it the motion sensor light was off. "There's a situation I'm managing. It's not a threat. It's a precaution. Is this connected to the business?" He said nothing. "Okay," she said. "So yes." Another pause. "Am I in danger?" "No." He said it hard and clean. "No. I won't let that happen." "That's not the same as no." He closed his eyes. She was right. It wasn't the same as no, and she knew the difference, and he had promised her honesty on a street outside a coffee shop 4 days ago, and that promise was being tested right now in real time. "There's a person who has taken an interest in my personal life," he said, "who knows your name and your connection to the family. I don't believe he intends anything. I believe he's gathering information for leverage. But until I've handled the source of the problem, I want you in a location I can account for." The silence on her end was the full kind, not the empty kind. He could hear her breathing, once, carefully. "What kind of person?" she said. "The kind I deal with professionally." "And dealing with them, what does that look like?" "I'm going to talk to him tonight." "Talk?" "Talk." He meant it. He had made a decision in the car outside the warehouse, and it had not shifted. I need this resolved cleanly. The only version that ends cleanly is a direct conversation. She was quiet. Then, are you going to be okay? Something moved in him at the question, the simple directness of it. Not what are you going to do, not is this handled, but the specific human question of whether he himself was going to be okay. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him that in exactly those words. Yes, he said. Stay inside. Christian? Yeah. Be honest with me afterward. Whatever happens. Don't manage it. Just tell me. I will. He drove back toward the city. The meeting with Reyes was arranged for 9 o'clock at a bar in the seaport that the organization had used for neutral ground conversations for years. Public enough to prevent escalation, private enough in its back section to allow frank speech. Reyes came with one man, which was within the agreed parameters. Christian came alone, which was not what Brennan had wanted, and what Christian had overruled, because arriving with muscle signaled a kind of meeting that he was not prepared to have. Danny Reyes was 31 and looked younger, the kind of young that read as calculated, worn like armor. He had sharp, watchful eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that movement attracted attention, and he sat at the corner table with a drink he hadn't touched and watched Christian cross the bar toward him with an expression that was trying for neutral and landing 2 degrees short of it. Christian sat down. He didn't order anything. He looked at Reyes across the table and said, "You've been patient." "I'm a patient person," Reyes said. 8 months running secondary product through my routes without authorization. That required patience, yes. Reyes's eyes didn't move. "I needed infrastructure. Yours was available. The arrangement was between me and a consenting party inside your organization. The consenting party didn't have authority to consent. That's an internal management problem." "It is," Christian agreed. "I've addressed it." He kept his hands flat on the table. Visible. Intentional. "I'm not here about the roots. The roots are over. You know that. I know that. What I'm here about is the material you've retained." Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in those watchful eyes. The assessment of a man deciding how much he knows he's known. "What material?" "Don't." Christian's voice was quiet. "Don't make me explain what I know, because explaining what I know tells you the shape of my exposure, and I'm not going to do that." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to tell you what I'm offering instead." Reyes was still. "The leverage you used on my associate, the personal matter from 2019. Christian had spent the drive over constructing this, and he delivered it without a note. "I can make that disappear, comprehensively. The documentation, the source, the chain of custody. It goes away and stays away, and your access to it becomes permanently unavailable." Reyes said nothing. "In exchange," Christian continued, "the communications you've retained are deleted. All copies, all backups, all locations. Not held, destroyed. And the questions you've been asking about my personal life stop immediately and do not resume." The bar noise filled the silence between them. Somewhere behind them, a group was celebrating something, laughing too loud, the sound expansive and oblivious. "That's a very precise offer," Reyes said. "I prepared it carefully." "What you're describing, making the 2019 material disappear, that's a significant ask. That would require—" "I have the capacity," Christian said. "That's not the question. The question is whether you want to reach an arrangement or whether you want to escalate." Reyes looked at his drink. "And if I escalate, then what you have becomes worthless," Christian said. "Because the moment I understand this isn't resolvable, I restructure everything those communications reference. Personnel, routing, documentation, every element. The communications become a map to a building that no longer exists." He paused. "That takes me 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, the organization continues operating and you have nothing actionable. After those 6 weeks, everything you retained is a historical document without a corresponding present-tense reality." He looked at Reyes steadily. "You lose your leverage and you make an enemy. I'm offering you the version where neither of those things happens." Reyes turned his glass slowly on the table. One full rotation. "The woman," he said. Christian felt his jaw tighten and consciously released it. "What about her?" She's the variable I don't understand. Reyes looked at him with those sharp eyes. You run a tight operation. You've run it tight for 7 years. Then she appears and suddenly there are gaps. Polly talks. Your household network gets sloppy. She's the thing that changed the geometry. He paused, not unkindly, with the flat curiosity of a man who solves puzzles professionally. That's the piece I've been trying to understand, whether she's operational, whether she knows what she's adjacent to. She's not operational. Christian's voice came out harder than he intended, and he pulled it back. She has no involvement in anything. Then she's a liability. She's not your concern. I'm making her my concern. Reyes's voice was level, no threat in it, just statement. If I'm going to reach an arrangement, I need to understand what I'm arranging around. She's a gap in your structure. Gaps are risks. He looked at him. So tell me, what is she? The question sat on the table between them, and Christian understood, with the clarity that came with certain moments, that the answer he gave right now would define something that couldn't be taken back. Not for the arrangement, not for the negotiation, for himself, for what he was willing to say out loud about what she was, in a room where saying it out loud had weight. He looked at Reyes. She's someone I'm not going to discuss with you, he said. She's not part of this arrangement. She's not a variable in your calculation, and the questions about her stop now, tonight, as a precondition of anything else on the table. That's not negotiable. Reyes looked at him for a long moment, read him, reached some conclusion. Non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. Another rotation of the glass. Then Reyes sat back. I need 48 hours to confirm the 2019 material can be accessed for destruction. I need to verify what you're describing is achievable before I commit to anything. 48 hours is acceptable, during which nothing moves on either side. Agreed. Reyes stood up. He was shorter than Christian by about 4 inches, and he moved with the contained precision of someone who had navigated rooms like this for years. And he looked at Christian one more time with those watchful eyes and said, for what it's worth, she walked into that dinner and your whole family shifted. I had someone watching the street. He said it without editorializing, just reporting. I've been doing this long enough to know when something's real. Christian said nothing. Reyes left. Christian sat at the table alone for 3 minutes. His drink still wasn't ordered. The celebrating group behind him had gotten louder. He pressed his palms flat on the table surface and breathed and looked at the grain of the wood and tried to locate the version of himself that had walked in here an hour ago, the operational version, the cold and calculated one, and found that it was still present, but it was sharing space now with something else, something that had no place in rooms like this but was here regardless, that had been here since a woman put her hand flat on his chest in a garden and felt his heart doing what hearts do when they have stopped performing. He pulled out his phone. 8 messages from Brennan, 2 from Tony, 1 from Donna, which surprised him. Donna communicated with him primarily through the temperature of her silences these days. He looked at Donna's message last. She told me about the arrangement, about New Year's. I need you to understand something. She wasn't protecting you. She was protecting herself, which means she was already... The message stopped there, incomplete. The way Donna's sharpest observations often arrived. She said the essential part and let the rest go unsaid because she knew he was capable of finishing the sentence. He was capable of finishing it. He put the phone in his pocket. He drove to Maya's apartment. She buzzed him up without asking who it was, which meant she'd been expecting him or expecting someone, and the fact that she'd buzzed without asking meant it was him specifically she'd expected, and the specificity of that landed in him somewhere soft and undefended. She was at the door when he reached the landing. She had changed out of whatever she'd been wearing earlier. She was in a sweatshirt, and her hair was down for the first time he'd seen it that way, loose around her face, and she looked younger and tireder, and more herself than he'd seen her look yet. And she looked at him standing in the hallway with his coat still on, and assessed his face the way she always assessed faces. Come in, she said. He came in. The apartment was small and lived in a way that his spaces were not. Books stacked not on shelves but on surfaces, a stack of children's books near the door that were presumably Arlo's, A kitchen table with a coffee cup and a laptop and papers spread out on it like someone had been working and had abandoned it for something more pressing. It smelled of coffee and something baked, faintly, left over from earlier. He stood in the middle of the room with his coat on and looked at her and said, "I handled the meeting." "Okay." She was watching him. "How did it go?" 48 hours. He needs to confirm some logistics, but it's resolvable. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She nodded. Her arms were crossed, not defensively, more like she was holding something in. "Donna called me," she said. "I know, I saw her message." "She's not angry at me. She's worried. She worries about everyone. She worries about you specifically." Maya looked at him directly. "She said you've been alone in this for so long that you've forgotten what it costs. The alone part." She paused. "She said that before tonight, before you called me about staying inside." Her voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't quite. "Then you called me and told me to stay inside, and she called me 10 minutes later and said that whatever was happening meant that something real had gotten close to your operation, and that the only way something real gets close to your operation is if you let it, and that you don't let things close unless—" "Maya, I'm finishing." He was quiet. "Unless they're already past the place where letting is the right word," she said. She looked at him with those direct eyes. "Is that what happened?" He stood in her living room in his coat and looked at the woman who had baked cannoli at 4 in the morning because she was nervous about strangers, who had sat with Louisa in a corner and given her something back, who had listened to a 91-year-old woman tell a story about crossing an ocean with a recipe, who had put her hand flat on his chest in a dark garden and felt his heart. And he said, "You were never supposed to be in this." "I know. I should have. When I realized what was shifting, I should have—" "What?" she said. "Walked away? Kept the distance?" She looked at him with something that was not anger, but lived in the same building as it, on a different floor. "I told you in your sister's kitchen that I don't know how to fake being somewhere. I told you that. And you brought me anyway. And you sat on a bench in the cold and told me things that cost you something to say. And you kissed me on a street like a person who had made a decision, not a person maintaining strategic positioning." Her voice was shaking now, slightly, the kind of shake that comes from steadiness pushed past its limit. "So don't stand in my apartment and tell me you should have kept distance. We are past the part where distance was available." He crossed the room. He didn't calculate it, didn't manage it, just moved, the way the body moves when the mind has stopped running the meeting. And he stood in front of her and put his hands on her face the way his mother had put her hands on his face at the door. Specific and certain. And looked at her and said, "I know." "Then say what you actually mean," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges. "I mean," he said, "that I am not going to let what I am touch you. I mean, I am going to handle this, and it is going to be clean, and you are not going to be in the path of any of it." "That's still management." "Maya, say the true thing." Her eyes were bright and direct and inches from his. "The thing Donna couldn't finish her message about. The thing you drove over here to say instead of calling." Her hands came up and gripped his wrists, not removing them, holding them there. "Say it." He looked at her. In the small lit apartment with the children's books by the door and the coffee going cold on the table and the whole machinery of his life grinding away somewhere outside these walls, conducting its 48-hour pause, waiting for him to solve it and restructure it and make it safe again. He said it. He said it plainly and without decoration, the way she'd taught him to say things in the week they'd spent calibrating each other, the way she'd demonstrated that honesty was not a vulnerability, but a form of precision. And when he finished saying it, the apartment was very quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I know. I've known since the garden." Outside, somewhere below on the street, a car alarm started up and then stopped, the city making its arbitrary noise, indifferent and ongoing. He held her face in his hands. She held his wrist. The 48-hour pause continued, ticking. "What happens," she said, "if he doesn't hold up his end?" "He will. If he doesn't." Christian looked at her. "Then I protect you first. Before anything else. Before the organization, before the operation, before every calculation I've been running since I was 32 years old." He said it like a fact, not a promise, because it had already passed the point of being a decision. It was simply what was true. You first. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face that he couldn't name. Too many things at once, the way her face always did too many things at once. And then she said, very quietly, "Then you'd better make sure he holds up his end." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. She glanced down at his pocket and back up. "You need to answer that." "Not yet." "Christian, not yet." He looked at her, memorized the specific composition of this moment, the lamplight, the children's books, her face in his hands, stored it in the place he had started keeping things that mattered. "One more minute." She didn't argue. The phone buzzed a third time. He let it. Then it buzzed a fourth time, rapid and repeated, the pattern Brennan used only for genuine urgency, and he felt Maya's hands on his wrists tighten briefly before she released him, and he stepped back and looked at the screen and read Brennan's message, and the temperature in his chest dropped to operational 0 in the time it took to read 11 words. Reyes didn't go home. He went to the federal building. He read the message twice. Not because he didn't understand it the first time, because reading it twice was the 2 seconds his mind needed to shift from where it had been, in the lamplight, her hands on his wrists, to where it needed to be now, which was somewhere colder and faster and more ruthless than lamplight. Maya was watching his face. She read it the way she read everything. What happened? Reyes went to the federal building. She was very still. After our meeting, he was already moving, pulling his coat closed, running the calculation. What Reyes had, what he could deliver in a single meeting with investigators, how long that meeting might have run, what its opening move would have generated. The timestamp on Brennan's message was 9:47. The meeting with Reyes had ended at 9:20. 27 minutes. Enough time to drive to the federal building on Seaport Boulevard and walk in and ask to speak to whoever he'd been cultivating contact with. It means he was never planning to take the arrangement. He was using the 48 hours as cover to buy time for a different play. What kind of different play? The kind where he leverages what he has directly to investigators in exchange for protection on his own operation. Christian stopped at her door, turned back. She was standing at the middle of the room where he'd left her, and she looked the way people look when the shape of something bad has arrived clearly for the first time. Not panicked, Maya didn't panic, but precise and still in the way that people get when they are managing something large. "I need to make calls. I need to go." "Go." Her voice was steady. "But Christian," he looked at her, "if this goes sideways, if the clean version isn't available," she held his eyes. "Don't disappear. Don't go quiet and manage it alone and call me in 3 weeks when it's resolved. I told you what I told you tonight, and I meant it. And if this is the thing that breaks it, I need to know that from you, not from Donna, not from silence." He looked at her for 3 seconds, counted them. Then, "I'll call you before midnight." He left. He called Brennan from the car. "How solid is the source?" he said. First thing, no greeting. "Solid enough. The man who saw him go in works the parking structure adjacent. He's been on retainer for 2 years. He confirmed the face and the time." "Did he go in alone?" "Alone. No counsel, which means this is preliminary. He's making contact, establishing a conversation, not delivering anything formal yet." Brennan's voice was doing the thing it did in genuine emergencies, which was get slower rather than faster, each word placed with the care of a man who understood that speed in a crisis produced errors. He doesn't have a formal agreement with them. Not yet. Going in alone without representation means he's testing what he's worth, seeing what they'll offer. Which means we have a window. Small one. Christian turned onto the expressway. The city at 10 o'clock on a January night had a specific emptiness, the after-dinner quiet before the late-night noise, the streets with room to move. He drove fast. "What's the status on the 2019 material, the thing he had on Polly?" "I started working it this afternoon when you gave me the parameters. I have a line to the source records. I can have them inaccessible within 4 hours." "That's not fast enough if he's already in the building." "I know, but there's a layer to this that changes the calculation." A pause. Brennan, who did not pause without reason. The 2019 incident involving Paulie's son. I pulled the original records to understand what we were working with. Another pause. Christian. The documentation Reyes has, it's not what he represented to Paulie. The incident is real, but the documentation is incomplete. What he showed Paulie was selected to look damning. In context, in full, with the complete record, it's a minor incident that was handled appropriately and closed. No criminal exposure, no civil liability. Paulie spent 8 months compromising this operation over something that was never the weapon Reyes said it was. Christian drove. The expressway lights moved overhead in a rhythm that was almost metronomic. Paulie didn't know. Reyes manufactured the severity. Yes, standard coercion structure. You show someone a piece of something ugly and let their fear build the rest of the architecture. Brennan paused. Which means Reyes's leverage inside the organization was always thinner than he made it appear. What he actually has that matters is the communications. That's the real asset. Can we challenge the admissibility of how they were obtained? That's a question for legal, but the interception method, if it went through an unauthorized device access on a private residential network, that has Fourth Amendment implications that a competent attorney can work with. Brennan was quiet for a moment. It's not a guaranteed dismissal, but it's not nothing. Get Hammond on the phone. Richard Hammond was the attorney who had handled the organization's legal architecture for 9 years. A dry, precise man from South Boston who had never once lost his composure in Christian's presence and who charged accordingly. Tonight. Now. I don't care what time it is. Already called him. He's waiting for your call. Christian allowed himself 1 second to be grateful for Brennan's particular quality of anticipation, which had saved him more times than he could count, and then he moved past gratitude into the next calculation. Reyes going in without representation is the critical variable, he said. He's showing them what he has without committing to terms. That means he's going to go home tonight with no formal agreement because they don't move that fast without their own lawyers present. He worked through it. He goes home. He waits for them to come back to him. That's the sequence. Yes, my read too. So the window is between now and whenever their first formal response reaches him, which is not tonight, which is probably not tomorrow morning. He calculated. We have until tomorrow afternoon at the outside. What do you want to do with the window? What he wanted and what was available were two different structures, and he needed to find the intersection. He ran it again. The communications existed. They couldn't be unmade. The method of their interception was challengeable, but not certainly defeated. The direct leverage approach, but the 2019 material, had just lost its teeth, which removed his cleanest exchange mechanism, which meant the arrangement he'd offered Reyes at the bar was now void, and Reyes had already made his countermove, and the board was different than it had been at 9:15. He pulled off the expressway. He drove to Hammond's office. Hammond was 61, silver-haired, and had the particular composure of a man who had been woken at 10:30 at night by calls like this before and had organized his life to receive them without visible disturbance. He met Christian in the conference room on the 14th floor with coffee already made and a legal pad and a pen, and he listened to everything, all of it, the roots, Paulie, the communications, the meeting, Reyes at the federal building, with his eyes on the legal pad and his pen moving in the small, precise script that Christian associated with things being handled. When Christian finished, Hammond looked up. The interception method is the first line of attack, he said. If the communications were obtained through unauthorized access to a private residential network, that's a federal violation in its own right. We file a motion immediately upon any attempt to introduce them. That doesn't guarantee exclusion, but it creates a legal burden that slows every subsequent move by months. I need more than slow. I know you do. Hammond looked at him steadily. Here's what you actually have. Reyes walked into that building tonight as an unrepresented individual carrying material obtained through methods that expose him to criminal liability. He did this without counsel. Anything he said in that preliminary conversation is on record, but it's also a negotiation overture, not a formal proffer. He paused. Investigators want Reyes. They want his network. The communications he carries about your operation are useful to them, but they're a secondary prize. What they actually want is the New York distribution network that Reyes connects to. That network is significantly larger than anything on the Marrow side. Christian was very still. You're saying he's not primarily offering them me. I'm saying he walked in there to sell himself into a protective arrangement by offering them a combination of things: your communications and access to his own network's rivals. If I were constructing his pitch, the Marrow material is the credibility builder, not the main event. He's establishing that he has serious assets to offer. Hammond set his pen down. Which means the investigators are going to want to verify what he has before they commit. Which means the window you've identified is real, and here's how we use it. He laid it out. It was not clean. Christian had known before he walked into this office that clean was no longer available. What Hammond described was the architecture of a managed retreat, protective restructuring of the operations most exposed by the communications, formal documentation of Paulie's situation as an employee acting without authorization, supported by Reyes's coercion, a voluntary disclosure to the organization's existing federal liaison on the logistics side that demonstrated proactive cooperation and preempted the investigators being able to claim a deliberate concealment. The voluntary disclosure would cost. It would narrow the operation's footprint in ways that would take years to rebuild. It would require Christian to step back from elements of the business that he had maintained and justified to himself for 7 years. But it closed the door. Properly, structurally, in a way that left the legitimate operation standing and made the communications, when they surfaced, and Hammond was clear-eyed about the when, a document describing a structure that no longer existed. Reyes ends up with a deal that covers his network, and a set of communications that reference things already disclosed and already restructured, Hammond said. He gets less than he thinks he's selling. The investigators get cooperation from your side that looks better than what Reyes is offering. Nobody gets a clean win. Including me. Including you. Hammond looked at him. The alternative is we fight it in full, which I am prepared to do. But fighting it in full means 18 months of federal scrutiny on every element of your operation, personal and organizational, during which time anyone adjacent to me is adjacent to that scrutiny, Christian said. Hammond was quiet. Do it, Christian said. The managed version. Start tonight. He stood up. I need it moving before Reyes gets a formal response from them. I'll have preliminary filings ready by 7 a.m. Hammond picked his pen back up. Christian. He said it in the way that meant he was about to say something that had nothing to do with legal strategy. The voluntary disclosure, the restructuring, what it asks of you is not small. I know. You've managed that operation for 7 years. I know. Is there a part of you? Hammond. Christian looked at him. I made the decision in the car. Don't make me make it again. Hammond nodded, put the pen to the paper, got to work. Mammed. Christian called Maya at 11:47. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she hadn't slept, which he had expected. I said before midnight, he said. You did. Her voice was careful and awake. What happened? He sat in his car in the parking structure beneath Hammond's building and told her. Not all of it. There were elements that belonged to the restructuring process that needed to move quietly and quickly, and the fewer people who held them, the cleaner the motion. But the shape of it, Reyes, the federal building, Hammond, what the managed version required, what it would cost. She listened without interrupting until he finished. Then she said, You're giving up part of the operation. The part that shouldn't have existed in the form it did. He said it plainly. I've known that for a while. Did Reyes force you to that, or? No. He was honest about it. Reyes accelerated the timeline. The conclusion was already there. He stopped. I've been standing at a door for a long time. He pushed it open. She was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? The same question she'd asked that afternoon. He sat in the parking structure with the engine off and the cold beginning to find its way into the car. And he thought about what okay meant, specifically, in real terms, tonight. I will be, he said. It's going to be a hard several months. The restructuring will be visible to people who watch these things. There will be talk. Will you be safe? Yes. Legally? Hammond thinks so. I trust his thinking. And Paulie. He had been deciding how to answer this question since the drive, and he answered it honestly. Polly made a decision that caused damage. He also made it under duress over something that turned out to be manufactured. Both things are true. I'm not going to pretend the damage doesn't exist, but the version of handling it that I'm choosing is not the version my father would have chosen. He looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure. He stays. He cooperates with the restructuring. He earns it back over time. That's the offer. She breathed once, carefully. Good, she said. Maya, I know what you're going to say. I need to say it anyway. He pressed the back of his head against the headrest. The car was getting cold. He didn't start it. What I'm walking through in the next several months is going to require a kind of focus that makes me a difficult person to be near. I know that. And you are... He stopped, found the honest version. You are not a person I am willing to be careless with, so I need you to tell me clearly what you can hold. Not what you're willing to hold out of stubbornness, what you can actually hold. She was quiet for long enough that he felt the weight of it. I'm going to tell you something, she finally said, and I need you to not turn it into a decision I'm making for your benefit. Okay? I have spent a long time, she said, being careful about who I let into the load-bearing parts of my life, because I learned that I don't do it halfway, and doing it halfway would be safer, but it would also be a lie, and I don't lie well. A pause. You are already in the load-bearing parts. That happened somewhere between the public garden and Thursday coffee, and it was not a conscious choice. It was just what occurred. Her voice was steady. So what I can hold is this. What I can hold is difficult months and federal scrutiny and a man who is restructuring his life into something it has never been before. I can hold that. What I cannot hold is being managed. What I cannot hold is careful distance deployed to protect me from my own decisions. He sat in the cold car. That's what you can hold. That's what I can hold. Then I'll stop being careful about the wrong things, he said. That's all I'm asking. He drove home. The next 4 months were exactly what he had told her they would be. Hammond moved fast and with the precision that had made him worth every dollar of his fee for 9 years. The voluntary disclosure landed on a Tuesday morning in mid-January, and it did the work it was designed to do. It repositioned Christian's organization from subject to cooperating party, a shift in posture that the investigators received with the careful neutrality of people who understood its significance without celebrating it. Reyes's formal proffer came in the following week, and it was, as Hammond had predicted, primarily about his own network, with the Marrow communications as supporting evidence. The communications were entered into the record. Hammond's motion challenged the interception method. The motion did not win immediately. These things did not win immediately, but it moved the material into contested territory, and contested territory bought time, and time was the resource that mattered most in this kind of proceeding. The operational restructuring was visible. Christian had known it would be. People who watched these things watched them closely, and the contraction of certain elements of the Marrow organization's logistics network was noted in the specific circles where such things were noted, and there was talk. And some of the talk was respectful and some of it was not. And Christian received all of it with the even-faced patience of a man who has made a calculation he knows is correct and is waiting for the world to catch up to the conclusion. He saw Maya on Thursdays when her schedule allowed, and sometimes on Sundays, and twice she came to the mansion for dinner that he cooked with middling results, and she ate with complete honesty, telling him exactly what was wrong with the pasta and being entirely right about it. He met her in her world, the coffee shop she liked near the library, the weekend market 3 blocks from Donna's house where she bought produce from a specific vendor she'd been going to for 2 years, the park where she took Arlo on Tuesday afternoons when the weather was good enough. He stood in those spaces and let them be what they were, ordinary and unhurried, which was not a mode he had extensive practice in, and she watched him practice it with the patient attention of someone who understood that learning to be in a place rather than managing it was not something that happened in a single lesson. Donna forgave him in March, not in a single conversation. Donna was not built for single conversation resolutions. It wasn't in her character, but through a gradual warming, a series of dinners at which the silences became shorter and the eye contact became more direct, and finally, On a Sunday in late March, when they were doing dishes together after a meal, while Maya read to Arlo in the other room, she said, "You should have told me. The arrangement. I know. Not to protect her. She didn't need protecting. I know. To protect yourself from doing exactly what you did." Donna handed him a bowl to dry. "If I'd known from the start, you couldn't have pretended it was just business." He dried the bowl. "Probably accurate." "Not probably." He looked at his sister. She looked back at him with their father's eyes and their mother's certainty, and something that was entirely her own. "She's good," Donna said. "For you, specifically. Not in a general sense, specifically." "I know." "Okay." Donna took the bowl back and put it in the cabinet. "Then act like it." Serafina called him on a Wednesday in April. Not about the business, not about the investigation, which she had learned about through the family's general awareness of such things, and had received in the same silence she received most difficult information, the particular Serafina Marrow silence that meant she was processing it fully before she spoke, which sometimes took weeks. She called on a Wednesday in April and asked him to come to Brooklyn that Saturday to help her move some furniture, which was the family's traditional phrasing for a conversation that needed to happen in person. He went on Saturday. She made him work, genuinely moved furniture, reorganized 2 rooms, the kind of physical labor she believed was morally clarifying, and afterward they sat in the kitchen with coffee, and she looked at him across the table with those dark eyes and said, "The business is changing." "Yes. Your father would have—" She stopped, started again. "Your father would have done it differently." "I know. I'm not saying he would have been right." He looked at his coffee. "I know." Serafina was quiet for a moment. She turned her cup on the table. "When I was 33, she said, I understood that the life I had chosen cost something I hadn't fully priced when I chose it, and I decided that I had chosen it, and the cost was mine to carry." She looked at him. "You did not choose what you were born into. You inherited it. There is a difference." He said nothing. "What you're doing now, the restructuring, the changes. Your brother Tony came to me in February. He said you were making moves that your father never would have made, and he wanted to know what I thought." She paused. "I told him I thought you were becoming the version of yourself that your father's death interrupted." Christian felt something in his chest that he didn't have a word for, old and specific. "The girl," Serafina said, not disparagingly, matter-of-factly. "Maya. Maya." She tried the name with the particular care of a woman who was deciding how to hold it. "She's good for you." Donna said the same thing. "Donna and I agree on very few things." She sipped her coffee. "The cannoli were excellent, by the way. I have been thinking about them since January." He laughed. It came out without planning, the real kind, and Serafina looked at him across the kitchen table with an expression that was not quite a smile. It was softer than a smile, the thing behind a smile, and said, "That. There." She nodded at him. "You used to do that when you were small, before it all got so heavy." He drove back to Boston in the late afternoon with the highway empty and the April light doing something to the landscape that made it look almost gentle, the brutal winter retreating by degrees, and somewhere in the second hour of the drive he understood that the thing he had been afraid of, not Reyes, not the investigation, not the restructuring, the thing he had been afraid of in the deep interior sense was simply this: that the life available to him was only the one he had already built, that there was no other version, that the man who had looked at this harbor from his office window on the morning of his mother's index card was the permanent and final version of himself. He had been wrong. It had taken a woman with broken strap canvas bags and stress-baked cannoli and the most direct eyes he had ever seen to demonstrate that he was wrong. And the demonstration had been costly in ways he was still accounting for, and it had been worth every single count. The investigation resolved in July. Not with a verdict. There was no trial, no dramatic courtroom conclusion. It resolved the way most things in the architecture of law and business resolved, in documents and negotiations, and a series of agreements that produced outcomes everyone could live with, rather than the outcome anyone had wanted. Reyes received his protective arrangement in exchange for material that helped dismantle 3 elements of the New York distribution network. The Marrow communications were entered, and then effectively neutralized by the combination of Hammond's interception challenge and the voluntary disclosure that had repositioned Christian's standing as a cooperating party. The operations that had been restructured remained restructured. There was no going back to the shape the thing had held before January, and Christian did not want to go back, which was the part he hadn't expected to be true and which turned out to be the most important truth of all of it. Hammond called on a Tuesday morning to deliver the news with characteristic economy. "It's done," he said. "There will be ongoing compliance requirements for 2 years. Nothing punishing. The consent structure we negotiated is workable." "Paulie?" Christian asked. "Clean. The coercion documentation is solid, and the 2019 material, in full context, was always what it was. He's got nothing to answer for legally." A pause. "Personally, that's between you two." It was. They'd had that conversation in February, the one Christian had been dreading, sat in the same back office at the Quincy warehouse where Brennan had laid it all out in January, and Paulie had said almost nothing for the first 20 minutes, and then he had said, "I should have trusted you." 3 words long, that sentence, and carrying 8 months of weight, and Christian had looked at him and said, "You were protecting your kid. I would have done the same." And meant it, and let it be enough. Because it was enough, because the alternative was an accounting that served neither of them, and he was trying to stop performing accountings that served neither party. He called Maya when Hammond's call ended. "It's done," he said, the same 2 words Hammond had used. He heard her breathe. Not theatrically, just a single exhale that meant something had been held and was now being set down. "Okay," she said. "Good. Are you at Donna's?" "Till 4. Come to the waterfront after. I'll cook." "You cook middling pasta." "I've been practicing." "Has it improved?" "Marginally." She laughed. The real one, short and unguarded, the one that recalibrated rooms. "I'll bring dessert," she said. "Don't argue about the dessert." "I never argue about the dessert." "You have argued about the dessert twice." "Those were discussions." 4 o'clock, she said, and ended the call. He stood at the window of his study at 3 in the afternoon and looked at the harbor. The same harbor he had looked at on the morning of his mother's index card, the same flat expanse of winter-turned summer water, the same city making its constant ambient claim. And he was not the same man who had stood here in December. The view was identical. The man was not. He thought about his father. Did this sometimes, briefly and without ritual, the way you think about a person who shaped the architecture of you? Not with grief, not with anger, with something that had no clean name. The compound feeling of a son who has understood something about his father that his father never understood about himself. Vincent Marrow had built something that was supposed to last. He had built it with the tools available to him, and within the understanding available to him, and he had believed, probably, that the weight of it was the price of permanence. He hadn't known there was another price. Nobody had shown him. Christian turned from the window. He went to the kitchen and started the pasta water. At 4:12, the front door opened. He'd given her the code in February, which had been its own kind of declaration. And Maya Callahan came in with a bakery box under her arm and her hair down in the way he had come to think of as her real way, and she set the box on the counter and looked at him at the stove and said, "You're actually cooking." "I told you I'd been practicing." She leaned against the counter, crossed her arms, looked at him with those level eyes. "How was Hammond's call?" "Clean. 2 years of compliance requirements. Nothing difficult." "And Reyes?" "Has what he negotiated. It's done." She nodded slowly. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and the July evening light was coming through the windows over the harbor, long and golden and unhurried, the kind of light that late summer produced in this city on the days when it was trying. She looked at the light on the water and then at him, and something in her face was doing the thing where it held too many things at once, but quietly, this time. All of it quiet. "I told Donna today," she said. "About?" "About the childcare center, the one I've been saving for." She looked at her hands on the counter. "I found a space. Affordable. Right area. It needs work, but the bones are good." She looked up. "I told her I was going to put in an offer." He turned the heat down under the pasta water, turned to face her. When? I'm putting the offer in Thursday. She watched his face. It's going to be a significant financial commitment on my end. It's going to change things. My schedule, my availability, She stopped. I wanted you to know before it was done. He looked at her across the kitchen. The woman who had showed up at his door in a green dress with a bakery box and absolutely no fear of his chaos. Who had sat with his grandmother and heard the ragu story. Who had told him to stop managing the wrong things and had meant it and had meant every other thing she'd ever said to him with the same total commitment she brought to everything. Who had held the load-bearing weight of a terrible several months with the steadiness of someone who had chosen what they were holding and didn't require reassurance about the choice. The offer, he said. What are the terms? 90-day close, inspection contingency. The asking price is, I know a contractor, he said, someone I trust, for the work it needs. She looked at him. Something moved in her face. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking. He kept his eyes on her. I'm offering, which you're allowed to decline, but I'm offering. She was quiet for a moment. The pasta water had come to a boil, and he turned to it and added salt, and she stood at the counter in the golden light and watched him cook and said, very quietly, the pasta has improved. He hadn't even put it in yet. He looked at her. You can't know that. I can tell by the way you're salting it. She pushed off the counter, opened the bakery box. You were under-salting before. It was the main problem. She turned to face him fully, with the box open and the cannoli inside and the harbor light behind her and the specific unguarded quality in her face that she wore in rooms where she had decided she was allowed to be wholly herself. Christian, yeah, it's good. What you've built here, the version you're building. She said it plainly, without inflation, with the precision she brought to everything true. I just wanted you to know that I can see it. He looked at her for a long moment. The pasta went in. The kitchen was warm. Somewhere below, the harbor did what harbors do, moved and reflected and continued, indifferent and constant, the same water it had always been, carrying whatever was placed on it. The ring, he said. She blinked. What? I'm not. He stopped, found the honest version. Not tonight, not yet. But I want you to know it's a direction I'm thinking in, so you can think in it too if you want, or tell me it's too fast, or, Christian, she was looking at him with those eyes. Stop managing the delivery. He stopped managing the delivery. I'm thinking in that direction, she said. I have been for a while. But she picked up a cannoli, took a bite, set it down, looked at him across the kitchen with the complete unperformed directness that had been the first thing he had noticed about her and would probably be the last. Feed me the mediocre pasta, and we can talk about the rest later. It's not mediocre anymore. Prove it. So he did. And the harbor moved outside the windows, and the summer light held as long as it could before it finally, slowly, let the evening in, and in the kitchen of a house that had been many things and was becoming something new, two people ate pasta and talked about a childcare center and a contractor and a Thursday offer, and nobody performed anything, and the night came on gentle and unhurried, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, finally, home.